The world was shaken in September of 2015 when a heart-wrenching picture of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi dead on a Turkish beach captured headlines. The Syrian boy was trying to reach Europe and ultimately Canada with his family, escaping war, poverty, and violence. Canada responded by pledging to take in 25,000 Syrian refugees, a promise that was fulfilled in February of 2016. Many faith groups and churches participated in the filling of that pledge. We wanted to check in to see how the process of adjusting to life in Canada has gone for some of these refugees. Joining me is Greg Musselman of the Voice of the Martyrs Canada and George McEachren, our former executive producer here, my former boss. George, are you going to be grading me on this interview?
I've been watching you. You're doing a fine job.
Oh,
and you taught her
every day.
You taught me everything I know.
Well, not quite. No.
Well, your church is bringing in Iraqi refugees, and it's interesting because Greg has a church of 600. We're going to check in with your experience in a minute. George, your church, 80 people.
Yes.
You guys are doing an amazing work for a small church.
Yes, it's a big commitment, and we wanted to do this for several years, but when the crisis came, as you had mentioned off the top there, that was kind of a motivation for us to say, we got to do something, and we applied, and we were accepted to take on a family.
And you took in a family, you didn't specify their religion or anything about them?
That's correct. We said, God, you know who we would be best with. And so he put that together for us. And so it was a family from Mosul in Iraq, and they had been in Jordan for 2.5 years at a camp. And so we received them on July 14th.
So you have some pictures here of them.
I do.
You've been helping them adjust. Let's look at
Yeah,
the
the best way to tell the experience is probably going through the pictures. So of course, Canada has been seeing at the airport several times over the next few months, the arrival of Canadians meeting refugee families, and this is the one. Then we took them right to our church, and there they are, the family coming to our church, and they come every Sunday, and they don't speak a lot of English, but they want to be there.
They're a Christian family, right?
They are a Christian family. And then we had to take them into all sorts of government office stuff. This is where they're getting assessed for their English to determine what level of classes they would have. And this, believe it or not, was their temporary residence. A man from our church lives right on the lake, and you know how much I love picnics. And I found out that they like KFC. So I said, I got to have a picnic on the lake.
International food, KFC.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then they made us a meal from an Iraqi meal called Doma. Beautiful time. They had us at their place.
Wonderful.
And then we figured they need to get to know Canada. So we went to Niagara Falls and spent some time with them. And after that, we took the little guy and all of them to an ice cream place. Look at that cute little guy. That's Kadur. Yes. And then, of course, they need a permanent residency. And so we found them a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment in a wonderful area of Etobicoke. And they are so pleased and so grateful.
What a beautiful family.
And we went to the Arab community. No, the Arab community had a picnic for all the refugees that come in the Toronto area, and they had a picnic for them, and the police were there. Some of these speak Arabic, and so the whole idea is for them to get to understand that the police are good people and they want to help and serve and protect.
Totally different from many places in the world.
And then it was Madeleine's birthday, so I made her a cake, and we had a birthday party for her. And then finally, trying to integrate them as we know that they love the Lord, they love Jesus. Melissa took them to the Hillsong concert. Just last Friday.
Nice. George, you've been doing great work. I want to check in about some of the challenges in a minute, but let's go to Greg. Greg, your family came from Syria, and you actually met them in Beirut before they came.
Yeah, it was a great privilege. We had identified, the family after I had talked to our, our church leadership back home, and they agreed that they wanted to sponsor a family from Syria and through the Christian Missionary Alliance. So we got everything going, and there's a church in Edmonton. It's an Arabic church, so we knew that we could help them, integrate, better into Canada. So when I was there in December, I met them. I spent, the morning with them. My daughter Sarah was with me. And then I did a video and brought it back to the church and introduced the family to our church family of, 500 or 600 people we have at St. Albert Alliance Church. And then there was an immediate connection. Then we set up a Facebook page where people could donate furniture, where they could toys and beds. And it was just wonderful the way our church pulled together. And it was very exciting. So to be able to, meet them, in Beirut, route, and they had come from Syria, from Aleppo, and to come into now into Canada, but through Lebanon. It was just an amazing time to be able to meet them, to connect with them, and then exchanging messages on Facebook, and then ultimately when they got to the airport, and then they came out, and of course we all got a little emotional because there had been a connection. I know that would have been the same with George's situation. The people were praying for this family. Yeah. They're connected with them, and then to see them at the church, yes. Because they come and visit us, and it's been wonderful. And
you see them in Beirut living in these desperate situations, and you hear their hopes and dreams of coming to Canada and starting a new life, and knowing what we have to offer here as a nation. How has that journey been now? Sometimes we think it's going to be like easier than it is or better than it is, but there is an adjustment, right? It isn't easy.
No, it's not easy at all. But, and I've even heard, government officials will say this, the best way to integrate a family into Canada, because, we hear of all the problems in Europe and some of these other situations and not all the families are as fortunate as the ones that we've been able to connect with in other churches across Canada, because there's the caring community. And so to be able to help them and then to have an Arabic-speaking church in Edmonton with my good friend Dr. Hani Gurgis, and then that community there really surrounding them, taking them to appointments and dentist appointments and getting the kids registered for school. And we didn't get to go to Niagara Falls, but we went to the West Edmonton Mall. So
hey, that's kind of similar.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and they've come from such trauma, from Syria, where the country's been literally destroyed, and yet now there's some life. And I get a little choked up when I hear the news reports, and I think that's affecting our church when there have been civilians killed in places like Aleppo. And you look at, Sako and Nadri and their two little girls, and you think, that could be that family. Thank the Lord they're in Canada, and in the case with Sako, he's trying to get his parents here. His father has medical issues, but we're praying that he'll soon be able to join his family in Canada.
You're right. 470,000 people killed in the Syrian war, 5 million people fleeing abroad. Of course, our Prime Minister was recently at the UN urging other countries to take in more refugees from this part of the world. You guys are doing your part. George, you're so proud of Canada. Actually, this is so interesting. I read this week that Canada's partnering with the UN and the billionaire George Soros to help other countries implement a version of our private refugee sponsorship program, what you guys are doing.
Yes.
And 13 countries want to know how we do it because we're so successful. What is your thoughts on this?
Well, what's amazed me, first of all, I want to say that our family is very grateful and thankful to Canadians to be here. They really express that a lot. But for us as a church, we're rewarded just by the fact of being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus. It really revitalizes your church congregation. The other thing that I want to say about Canada, I was never aware of all the infrastructure that's in place to help refugee families. English classes, getting them dentist work and family physicians, and all this help that's in place, taking them to orientation to learn more about Canada. And it's just amazed me just how broad and deep and wide the infrastructure is in place to help those immigrants.
Well, I think of you, George, you were one of the most passionate people about this ministry, about this show, and you poured your life in here for decades. Yeah. And when you retired, there's a loss, right? There's a grief and a loss.
Yeah.
How is this in your retirement kind of reinvigorated you?
Well, it couldn't happen at a better time because, going from what I was doing here and then retiring, I needed to be doing something.
Well, this is a high energy position too.
It is, but I love my church, and I've been involved in the church, so this was just perfect for me because you do need people who have time, because it's a commitment that it's pretty strong commitment of time and energy.
For a church your size, especially.
Yes.
Greg, I see you, both of you are in a way a bridge, I think, because a lot of times we see refugees and they don't speak English and we don't have a way to know their heart and we don't exactly know how they're adjusting. And so speak for them. What are you hearing from them? What does it mean for them that they have this new chance at life?
Well, they're grateful, to be here. And, you see the joy, and I see in your photos and when we've met them, there's just a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of heartache because they have lost friends. I mean, whether from Mosul, and we've talked about that in previous shows and the horrible things that have gone there, all the violence in Syria, there's an aching in their heart for their people, and they would like to see more of them come here. But they are appreciative of Canada, and especially the Christian community. And I'd like to say this, is that, when I was actually doing an interview with you, I was in Amman, Jordan, and we were talking about the whole refugee situation, because it was, I think, at the tail end of our election and the promises and that, is that you know, as Christians, we need to welcome the aliens, the strangers, and the household of faith. We need to do that. We need to show compassion. And as a result of that interview that I did there, I was getting calls from people and emails and through our Voice of the Martyrs office of being able to sponsor churches in places like Sioux Lookout in Ontario and BC and right across the country to have families that are waiting to come to Canada to be able to partner. So we're kind of the bridges. So is Huntley Street. And then as the churches get involved, and George said, like, be ready for a big job. We have many people in our church that are involved in this process, and it's giving them a different understanding of what it is. And it revitalizes our churches in Canada. We need that, and we can learn a lot from them. Like Sacco, who we brought, he's a worship leader. He was leading worship when I met him over in Beirut, and now he's leading worship amongst the Arabic church. And I was actually just across the street because Hanny happens to be my neighbor in St. Albert where I live, and I was with people from Egypt, from Iran, from Iraq, all over the world, Syria, and they were worshiping in Arabic. And Arlene and I were sitting, my wife and I were sitting there just going, this is as good as it gets. And the food, of course, Middle Eastern food is the best.
Yes,
my
love
favorite.
it.
So
Love
I
it.
think we have this partnership. And so I'd really encourage, those that are watching today that if God is stirring on your heart to maybe sponsor a family, contact myself or through Crossroads, through Voice of the Martyrs. Again, that's not what Voice of the Martyrs does. Our ministry is to strengthen the believers already in the country.
Yes.
But we also have a responsibility as Christians to look after brothers and sisters. And they are zealous to reach others for the gospel of Jesus Christ in Canada. And some of them want to go back and minister in their home countries if the Lord opens up that door.
I love it. There was a lot of fear in Canada as we saw terrorism rise, a lot of fear that terrorists would come among these refugees. George, briefly now, because we're running out of time, you opened the door to any kind of refugee, Muslim,
That's right.
whatever. It could have been a terrorist, it could not have. And, we said on this show that we should choose love over fear.
That's right.
How did you walk that out? Because you didn't know what kind of, who they would be.
We just trusted that God would take care of what he knew we would be responsible for. And so it's turned out very well. One thing I want to say is that on this Thanksgiving Day, we should be thankful for Canada and what we have here. And certainly when you bring people in from conditions that are deplorable, you realize just how grateful we ought to be as well about Canada. And they're teaching us to be reminded of just a wonderful country that we have.
Well, I can't think of a better thought to end this interview on. Thank you, both of you. I felt like we just started unpacking what this experience will be like, and hopefully we'll follow up with you in the months to
Maybe someday
come.
you'll get to meet them.
I would love that. I would love that. Maybe we'll take them to a Blue Jays game.
There you go.
That would be awesome.
Or a Maple Leafs game. No, it's too expensive.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Well, listen, if you're watching, we want to encourage you to get involved in this. There's lots of families that are waiting to come here that you and your church or your organization, or even just you and your friends, could do if you're ready to put in the work and make the commitment. We need to reach out and love the world. And what George said, let's be thankful today. Let's take a moment and just thank God for the blessings that we have in this nation.